Hi, I'm George Abernathy, the proud president of FreightWaves, and welcome to day one of our Global Supply Chain Week, the initial Global Supply Chain Week for FreightWaves. Today is our Military Aerospace and Manufacturing Day, and I'm really thrilled to be able to help to foster some conversation today in our keynote fireside with Scott Paul. Scott, thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it.
George, it's great to be with you and with your audience at FreightWaves today.
Appreciate that. Let me do some level setting for everybody quickly about Scott. Scott Paul is the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. I'm going to use AAM going forward, which is a partnership that was established in 2007 by some of America's leading manufacturers and the United Steelworkers Union. Scott and AAM have worked to make American manufacturing and Made in America top of mind concerns for voters and our national leaders through their effective advocacy, their policy development work, and data-driven research. And for those of you who know FreightWaves, data-driven is a keynote and a keystone for us. So Scott currently serves as the board chair for the National Skills Coalition, is on the board of visitors of the Political Science Department for Penn State. He sits on the Leadership Council of the Alliance of Manufacturing Foresight. I could keep going with Scott's bio, but I think we've established that this is going to be a perfect way to kick off today. So, obviously, Scott, the current circumstance around COVID and the pandemic, let's start with that and sort of go from there. How have the AAM member companies adapted their manufacturing and their supply chains because of COVID-19?
George, thank you for that question. And obviously, many of your listeners out there have had their work and personal and family lives disrupted in serious ways by the pandemic. I can share a bit about what the experience of some of our stakeholders has been. And I imagine it will sound very familiar. A lot of manufacturing is considered essential. And so, while much of the country did shut down, places like steel mills and other manufacturing facilities that were deemed essential either because of national security, homeland security, health preparedness reasons, did stay open. And so, we saw workers and managers be on the front line of both taking precautions and also exposing themselves to some risk, frankly, to keep our country moving. And I know folks in the transportation and logistics sectors obviously faced many of the same concerns. Now, the market, and this is a bit of an understatement, was seriously disrupted by the pandemic. And steel in particular being kind of a base material in a lot of goods, they don't like to oversupply the market. And so when auto production, when other production kind of slowed down or stopped, some of those mills did stop running. And a lot of manufacturing workers were laid off. In fact, more than 1 million manufacturing workers were laid off just in the first 6 weeks of the pandemic or so. Now, since that time, and since people have gotten into more of an altered routine and, supply and demand started to roughly realign again, although obviously in dramatically different ways than they were before, we've seen workers come back on the job. But net total from an employment perspective, manufacturing is still about 580,000 jobs in the whole, in a sector of almost 13 million workers. And we've seen lots of disruption in supply chains. And so it has taken a great deal of skill, a great deal of patience, a great deal of adaptability to try to come to terms with this new market and this new reality that many of us are in right now.
So let's talk a little bit about how the market shifted. And early on, and I appreciate the statistics and information around how far have we bounced back. So initially, was I believe there was a significant shift towards emergency products and PPE March and April. How much of that did occur that you saw, and are you seeing the trend that is continuing as we go forward?
Yeah, yeah. So both in the PPE and in the health protective supplies, and in things like ventilators or other equipment, very early on in the pandemic, you saw both manufacturers who were already in those markets have to find ways to scale up. Okay, you saw manufacturers like Ford shift dramatically from assembling engines to assembling ventilators, with new schematics and some new design, and to do that very nimbly. And you saw a lot of entrepreneurs and communities partner together. And I've seen this in many locations where local hospital systems partnered with local manufacturers, whether it was the Cleveland Clinic and local manufacturers in Cleveland, or Ochsner Health with local manufacturers around New Orleans, to try to get face masks and protective gear and all of that, and just go straight to these manufacturers and say, "Can you do this for me?" And I think one of the most remarkable things that I'd seen, because I do think there's a lot that we didn't get right about the response to this as a nation and from a public policy perspective, but one of the things that I think that we did get right, and from a private sector perspective, was the amount of altruism and sense of duty that so many manufacturers had to contribute to be part of the solution to this. I think can give us some hope in this time, and certainly are contributing to a solution, whether it's dramatically innovating on the pharmaceutical side to develop a vaccine, in such an extraordinarily an effective vaccine, and multiple effective vaccines in an extraordinarily short amount of time here, and with dramatic scale, get those into market. I mean, that's just that's unbelievable. Or to see these manufacturers pivot and to make products that our medical professionals are demanding is also unbelievable. And and the things that we take for granted. I mean, you probably remember the day, George, when toilet paper was a bit like finding some gold, right? I mean, it was very rare, or concert tickets. And I know a mill in northern Wisconsin that makes toilet paper for Costco, and they found a way to just run around the clock. And as soon as they were rolling out those massive cartons of toilet paper, they were going right into the trucks, right off to the stores, and it was just a continuous cycle. And so it was look, World War II was obviously a serious threat to our democracy, and it was an all-hands-on-deck enterprise, and we became the arsenal of democracy, just churning out this stuff. And so I'm not going to pretend like it was on that scale, but it is. I think it was one of the most profound shifts that we've seen, certainly since that time, to respond to a public emergency, and to also adapt to just extraordinary circumstances that all of us are facing as individuals who could be exposed to the virus.
It's so well said. The nimbleness of our manufacturing capabilities, and then how the supply chain was able to deal with that, I think is something that we'll look back on and really be proud of. Interesting. Let me look a little bit going forward. The AAM has a Build Back Better blueprint for this new Biden administration. Speak to that a little bit. What are the primary aspects of that blueprint?
Yeah, thanks, George. And I will say, we're nonpartisan. We do work with labor and business, so we've had deep ties both to the Trump administration as well as to the Biden administration. I think it positions us well to be a good voice, an effective voice for factory workers out there. And one of the features that I think I like about the Biden plan, and there were certainly a lot of elements of what the Trump administration did that I liked as well. I want to be clear about that, but I think that it is clear that our nation has underinvested in our public capital. And we see that just as we're recording this in Texas, with the with the situation with the energy grid there is a very tangible example, or the dam that ruptured in Michigan, recently, that displaced lots of folks and caused a lot of damage. I mean, our infrastructure is crumbling, and so it's past time that we address this. But to the specific elements of the plan, I think that the elements that have me the most excited, first of all, we have to get through this pandemic, and we have to do it in a way that is fair and equitable to all Americans. And Congress is obviously on track to doing that right now. The second is the real recovery, because that's like the relief and like the triage, George, that I'm talking about. But the actual recovery and building a more sustainable and resilient economy is, I think, something that addresses many goals that Americans hold dear, whether it's to be aware of our climate future, or of some of the structural racial inequities that we've seen in our country. And that's where I think that investing in manufacturing can pay serious dividends forward, and position us as a clean energy leader, so that we are building those electric vehicles right here in the United States rather than importing them from China, or that we are looking at a diverse homegrown energy portfolio, solar, wind, other renewables, along with natural gas and what have you, again, that is produced here in the United States. It would be a silly trade-off for our country just to trade foreign oil for made in China solar panels. I think, and that's, I don't think, an idea that Americans are excited about. But I do think that as we look ahead in the century and look at the challenges that we are going to face, that having robust public investment in infrastructure, in clean energy technology, in making sure that we have a skilled workforce, and that means investing in high school level and community, and then career and technical education, post-secondary level for adults and kids alike. I think that's going to be critical as well. And then structuring a set of economic policies that reinforces that and provides the right incentives. And instead of our nation being governed by some, I guess, philosophy that exists perfectly well in textbooks, but when you look at like our global competitors, or the 5-year plans in China, or the state control of the economy, or the amount of resources that a country like Germany puts into its manufacturing base, or some of our Asian competitors, I think the American entrepreneurial spirit, that our ingenuity is unmatched, and I don't think we need to copy and paste any of those plans. But I think that we can have a decidedly American plan that recognizes the value of manufacturing, the value of work as being central to our economic progress. And so that's one of the aspects of the Building Back Better plan that I think is going to be key, both for us to make sure that we're exporting, to make sure that we're growing our economy, and that we're growing it in a way where there's broadly shared prosperity.
It's so fascinating as you talk about the recent circumstances that have happened with the weather and the impact to the Texas power grid. And really, I appreciate you talking about trading oil for solar panels coming from coming from another foreign country. So let me and by the way, in the world of thinking about power grids, I live 4 miles that way from a nuclear power plant, and I'm in Tennessee, where the Tennessee Valley Authority produces one heck of a lot of hydroelectric power. So I'm pretty certain that between now and the time that we finish this great conversation, I'm not losing power. I'm gonna be just fine. So let me talk a little bit about the way that you're seeing, or are you seeing, that manufacturing jobs are being reshored, if you will, because of the disruption and the scare that we went through with so many supply chains being disrupted, and having that element, offshore element to those supply chains. Are you seeing a lot of talk happened that would occur, that we would see more manufacturing jobs coming here? Are you seeing that talk turn into reality?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is both yes and no, which I'm sure is unsatisfying, but I'll explain as best as I can. The Trump approach very much focused on kind of deregulation, broad-based tax cuts, and then the tariff combination. Certainly disrupted trade, and I'm sure that your listenership, your viewership knows that very well about some of the impacts that had. But I don't know that it fundamentally altered a lot of the dynamics, other than folks rethinking China as the sole supplier, particularly for critical materials. I think that's certainly underway. Question about where that lands or how much of it is, I think, still an open question. And so it is. I think that, and I'm going to channel a little of our founding fathers here. Alexander Hamilton was our first Treasury Secretary. Also, a lot of people might know him from a musical. He's kind of popular, but he, when he served with George Washington in the Continental Army, they were always complaining about the lack of supplies and how they were dependent on the French and how the British had everything they needed. And there was a paucity of American manufacturing capability at the time. And so when they started the administration, one of the things they definitely wanted to set out to do is how can we make more stuff in these 13 new states that we have that are largely formed around a kind of like a merchant economy and a plantation economy, not a manufacturing economy. And so it took a plan. It takes intent to get there. And the Hamilton plan was a bit of tariffs to help start industry up, but also investing in infrastructure. And you've seen this thread throughout our history. Abraham Lincoln with the Transcontinental Railroad, the land-grant university system to support research and to provide broad-based education. You've seen it with Eisenhower with the interstate highway system, and certainly there have been many other iterations of this. But I believe it does take some intent on the part of public policy and the government to make this a reality. So how do you effectively reshore some of that? I think you do have to have the right tax incentives. You have to have a balanced trade policy. I'm not in favor of a fortress America, but I do think we need to continue to push back on unfair trade practices and also realize when there's governments subsidizing their industry, our private sector firms, no matter how amazing they are, no matter how productive they are going to have a hard time going up against those trillions of dollars of cash that are subsidizing their competitors at almost any cost. And we need to place a value on our education dollars. And it's great that we have world-class Ivy League institutions. I'm all in favor of those. But unfortunately, some of that has come at the expense of investment in our community colleges and career and technical education. And we certainly have to devote more towards there. So there is a role for government in this. The private sector and the skill of the workers, the capability of our managers, the ingenuity of our innovators, that's going to make a difference. But they need to be supported by our public policies and not turned away. And so I think we're getting to a moment where more in the Congress, more in the administration, whether it's Republicans or Democrats, kind of recognize that and understand it's not just like deregulation or like a big corporate tax cut that is necessarily going to get us where, that it takes a little more shaping than that to have the economy that we want. Because, yeah, we had a comparative advantage in plantations in 1800, but that didn't serve anybody well, and it wasn't sustainable. We can build a 21st century economy that is fair and equitable and has lots of opportunities to enter the middle class. But there has to be some intent there, George.
Absolutely. So let me spin a little bit to some of what our viewers are their core competencies are around transportation and logistics. And I'm interested in how the AAM membership has been evolving. Do you see more emphasis in that area? Do you see your membership either both becoming more sophisticated in transportation logistics or desiring to do so?
Oh, absolutely. Everybody is becoming smarter about this and more digitized, and every day. And that's certainly a welcome trend. And so I think that we'll continue to see that evolve, and I'm excited about the possibilities as we look ahead with more autonomy and with more efficiency, and what all of that could mean. I will also say, and I'll just give the steel supply chain as an example here, that it shows how fragile transportation logistics is, particularly with extreme weather events, as we've been having conversations about, or the need to upgrade our infrastructure, or look at if we're headed towards carbon neutrality in the future, what that's going to mean. And so I think there's much more awareness of that, because if the Great Lakes are freezing up, you can't get your iron ore where you need to go. And so how else do you do that, right? And so I think that's like, one concern. And then if we're looking at, carbon pricing, how is that going to impact international shipping? Because, there are lots of benefits to international shipping, but it's frankly a polluting enterprise. And so how do you clean that up in a way, whether it's by air or over the water or over land? And everybody is examining that now. And I feel like, and I'm trying to find the way to articulate this, that we've certainly got solar, wind, some of these ideas off the ground, and so getting to the next level here on things like battery storage and cleaner transportation, whether it's aviation fuel or shipping fuel or whatever else that we're talking about. I think that's where the next both private public investment kind of needs to be, because that's obviously where a lot of the carbon output is as well. And so I think there's a very great awareness on the part of our stakeholders about the need to invest in that and to be a part of the solution.
So I'm sure that there will be a number over this 8-day global supply chain week that we're hosting. I'm sure that this will not be the first time that ESG is being thought about or talked about, and I'm sure that it will be talked about in a number of the different conversations and informations that are being provided. And in the way that you're describing it, it sounds like your community are actively pursuing not just lip service now, and again, nonpartisan and the like that we're talking about, but they're actively engaging in ESG considerations. And would you describe that they'd be more likely to work with other companies that are similarly aligned?
Well, I mean, I think that there will be a lot of external, both internal and external forces that will shape those kinds of relationships. The internal being the mission focus that these companies have, and more companies have now. The external being whether it is carbon pricing or the views of the investment community, which I think are growing a little bolder on this, and how public policy shapes that as well. And I just, and so I'm excited about the opportunities rather than kind of blindly ignoring this and thinking that it's somehow going to disappear, because I think being part of the solution is going to be critical, both to keeping these enterprises moving forward, creating job opportunities, and then producing the outcomes that I think all of us want to see from this.
Well, we're coming down to just having a minute or two left, but you work with and your member companies and your alignment with the world of steel and steel workers. I just sort of boil it down. Is steel in 2050? Is there an effective way that will be carbon neutral? Do you have a sight line to that? Is that a realistic thought?
I wish I were a metallurgist and could give you a completely
Sure.
informed answer on that, George. But I do believe again with this investment, and with I mean, look, we got to solar, we got to wind, we got to these other technologies with a massive amount of innovation and investment. And so if some of that is shifted to things like clean steel or clean cement or clean transportation, there is no doubt in my mind that we can make that happen. And I know right now that our stakeholders are already partnering with uh, our automotive companies on building the steel for the next generation of automobiles that are going to be electric and autonomous and to fit those profiles. And so that is a process that is underway. I think the important thing to drive that progress forward is that there needs to be a global solution to this as well. And this is the part where I say, China makes 55% of the world's steel now. And a lot of that is made in blast furnaces that are, 3 or 4 times carbon emitting than those in the United States. And so our guys, aren't doing this in a vacuum. And that's why the public policy support and the global cooperation is going to be very important to making sure that America is a leader rather than a laggard and is going to suffer through this. I want to view this as a moment where we have immense opportunity, but we do have to get the policy right. And we can't pretend like that this is happening in a vacuum.
Boy, that so well said. Leader, not laggard. Thank you for doing this, Scott.
Sure.
I genuinely appreciate it. This has been a fabulous way to have our keynote of military aerospace and manufacturing. So again, thank you to Scott Paul. Scott, the president of AAM, the Alliance for American Manufacturing. Scott, thank you so much for doing this.
George, thank you. Stay safe and be well.
Thank you. Same to everybody. Enjoy the rest of Global Supply Chain Week. Be well.